she has pursued her passion of teaching with her own consulting company. Marilyn is a lover of learning and shares her interests through talks and team building, personal growth and spiritual growth to companies, unities, and special interest groups. She continues to volunteer with the IK Outreach Missions and with Unity Kitchener, and we are so blessed to have you, Marilyn. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to share my screen so I can put up a few slides for you, just to enjoy the talk without just seeing my face here. I did put on my rainbow glasses today. I want you to notice I wear a red dress and I have red shoes on. I thought we got to do the whole shebang. Let me just make this big a second here. Oh, everything wants to wait a couple seconds. So we're going to take a little metaphysical walk down the yellow brick road. Has anybody not seen the movie? There might be a few of you who have not seen this movie. It's a beloved 1939 movie, but it actually came from a book. So we'll talk about that a little bit first and talk about the book. And Ogun talked about radical acceptance through this particular month. And it's been an interesting journey to walk through the metaphysics of the Wizard of Oz and learn some things and realize how much it's about radical self-acceptance in the big scheme of things. So we'll walk through some of the things that kind of attach that all together, and the whole month is sort of a nice little package in that way. So sit back and enjoy. Let's have a little bit of the song first.
Follow the yellow brick road.
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 Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow, 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 follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick, follow the yellow brick, follow the yellow brick road. You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. You'll find he is a whiz of a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever, oh ever a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Well, let's take a little pause right here for just a moment. The Munchkins sang that song to Dorothy. And actually, the wonderful Wizard of Oz had never really been seen by the Munchkins. There was just this idea that something was out there. So you can see this starts our unity journey right off the bat with the metaphysical part, that there's something out there. No, there isn't. It's all inside you anyway. So let's start at the very beginning. Before there was the Wizard of Oz movie, there was the Wizard of Oz book written by L. Frank Baum. He actually wrote 14 Oz books. So the Wonderful Wizard of Oz was a beginning, and then he wrote about all kinds of different areas of the land of Oz. In the original version, there was actually 4 witches, 2 good, north and south, 2 bad, east and west, and there was a community that involved with each one. So it was kind of an interesting set of books where every time he wrote a book, apparently the next book sort of started to come out because people say, what happened next? Or what about these folks? Or how do we explain this thing? So he went on to publish 14 more Oz books. And it was published in 1900, and it sold over 1 million copies by 1930. And in that time of North America purchasing, 1 million copies of books was a lot. I didn't know this before, but in 1902, there was a Broadway musical of The Wizard of Oz based on the book. I did look it up. The songs aren't the same. It's an entirely different version of the same thing of the book. And like our version of the movie, it doesn't always follow the book exactly, which often movies, as you know, take some of the books and they condense them into the movie version. One thing I learned this week by looking up a few things with the metaphysics is that the original slippers in the original book of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz were silver, not ruby red as we often think of the wonderful red slippers. And apparently part of that was that Frank believed that there was a silver thread, which is common in religious stuff, a silver thread between earth and heaven. And that's where the earth part came into it. It was a thread through these slippers to a heaven-like state. Interestingly enough, I think Frank was a bit of a unity person. He was thinking of it as not being a religious part of things, but following simply the searchers of truth. In fact, that are dissatisfied with the world, and the dissenters from all creeds are not following a dogma. Does that sound like unity? That sounds a lot like unity to me. They admit the existence of a godlike spirit or thing, but it's not a human. It's not somebody out there on a throne somewhere, not necessarily a personal God. And to them, God is nature and nature is God. So it was interesting to me that the God word gets used, and Frank believed in this, but the idea that it is not out there, it's not a being that we have to look towards. Interestingly enough, when we talk about the Wizard of Oz. So think about that as we go through and look at this metaphysics. So Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the movie, was by MGM, first shown August 21st, last week, 1939, 83 years ago. It was the first Technicolor movie. So you'll notice the beginning of the movie is in a sepia kind of color, right? So it's just colored on black and white, bit of a sort of a caramel colored background. And the way they did Technicolor was to put 3 cameras on the same scene, but each camera had a colored film over top of it, or filter, and then they were able to combine them and make it into a colored movie. It was a big deal. People loved the idea that they could see color. And of course, why did the slippers become red? Because red was a great color to have in the movies. So really, the whole idea of the silver slippers becoming the red slippers had no more intent that become so popular, except that they were just better looking in the movie screen in the big scheme of things. So it was adapted from the book. As I mentioned, there was things that got left out and didn't get used in the movie, but it went on to produce all kinds of other things, including The Wiz, which was another musical movie. You might remember it from 1974 if you're around then. And that was based on an entire career of a cast of colored people, which was Diana Ross and Michael Jackson. They started that and made a whole movie around that. The other thing that came from that I'm most familiar with is the book Wicked, which was by Gregory Maguire. He also wrote several books on the idea of what happened to the other people in Oz. And Wicked was based on the book of the idea of what happened to the Wicked Witch of the West. Where did she come from? Why was she green? Her name was Elphaba. And what was her life all about? And of course, it became a really popular musical as well, which is always, it was fun to watch. If you haven't seen that, it's well worthwhile to see that and enjoy that as well. So let's talk about the characters in the book. I won't tell the whole story. This isn't a deep dive. This is kind of scratching the surface. There's tons of information on the internet if you want to go look anything up. But interesting to have You've Got a Friend as our opening song, because if you actually look at the words of that, it also reflects very much back to this movie. You've got somebody always to call on, somebody always with you. And this is a movie a lot about friendship and depending on others, showing each other the way, making sure that people are held up to be both accountable, but also to make sure that they are felt that they're supported in both ways. So You've Got a Friend. Dorothy simply represents our consciousness. She gets removed from the safety of her home in a cyclone and gets taken away to continue a life journey. The life journey she ends up taking with all the friends she meets along the way, et cetera, is actually life-changing. And isn't that what happens to us often? We go from a safety place, from a comfort zone, from where we know what everything is and it's all good, and some kind of chaos shakes us up, and then we move on to a different life journey. And how many times have we said, boy, if I didn't have that weird thing happen, bad, different, unusual, whatever, I wouldn't have got to this place. And that's where Dorothy comes from, a very safe home, and goes into something else. By the way, her last name is Gale, Dorothy Gale, which I think is also kind of funny because, of course, she goes through a cyclone, which is kind of like a gale, which is kind of fun. Frank named Dorothy the character because apparently he and his wife had 3 sons, but they didn't have a daughter. They sort of longed for a daughter, didn't have one. But there was a niece who was a daughter to his wife. And unfortunately, the niece died at 5 months old from what they called brain fever at the time. But because she was quite a beloved girl in the family, Frank decided to call his character Dorothy. And she truly represents inner strength, and really the unknown abilities that she didn't know she had until she was faced with various traumas and things to decide on and how to work with things to make it better for her. Now, Toto is her dog. Toto shows up from square one, always with her, an absolute dedicated friend without question. Toto actually never speaks, but Toto, interestingly enough, is the way shower. Toto is always there, always communicating without speaking. Of course, there's a bit of barking that goes on. Toto always either goes ahead and checks us out or finds out where things should come from and brings it back to them. When Dorothy runs across the scarecrow and there's just something talking, she goes, "Who's that speaking?" It's Toto that goes and barks and puts her towards the scarecrow. Toto is the actual real true spiritual teacher within this, and loving without condition. So if you watch the movie again, watch how much Toto has to do with how things move forward in the movie and how he is always the one to go ahead and do things to make sure that Dorothy is safe and always shown the right path. In the very beginning, the Wicked Witch comes along as Miss Gulch riding a bicycle. You might remember that. And Toto goes up and bites her because he knows that behind that facade is something not good. And he warns Dorothy about her by going over to bite her. And there's the Wicked Witch. That was played by Margaret Hamilton. The Wicked Witch represents our deepest fears. As Kelly Isola talks about, our shadow self, the stuff in the background, the things that aren't always true. Because fears, we know from what Reverend Ogan said, fears are things we just kind of make up, right? It's worrying about the future. That's really what fear is. And fear is never really more than something that we can have as melted by water. And when in the long run, the Wicked Witch gets melted by water. There's a house that falls on her first. Dorothy gets her slippers back. But in the long run, the truth will prevail. And in the truth is like the water and actually disperses the witch. Quick little fact about Margaret Hamilton: in the original movie, when they were trying to make her green, they actually hurt her quite a bit. There was a chemical makeup that had a reaction on her skin, and she spent several years actually recovering from that. So kind of interesting that the Wicked Witch part of the movie also was something that didn't happen really good to the character either. The Wicked Witch may represent specific people or places or things in your life, but a lot of times it's people. And people, oftentimes in families or friendship groups, there's somebody that wants to create some kind of chaos or upheaval. And this is where fears come from. The other fear that we have is something will happen to somebody else we love, whether it's a pet or a person or whatever it is. And she'll say, as you know, the famous quote is, "I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too." And of course, Dorothy wants to protect her dog. Of course, Toto is there to be protected. So it's interesting how the Wicked Witch brings up the fact that I'm going to get you, but also get the things around you as well. And metaphysically, we're often made afraid because, of course, we're afraid of something happening to us, but we're also afraid to something for happening around the outside of us. And the fear can come up based on, whether it's our children or our family or our friends having any kind of chaos or discomfort. Wicked Witch plays prominently in this film. It's probably one of the most known characters ever anywhere. And of course, what do we deal with every day? We try to look at our shadow self and our deepest fears. So watching what shows up as the Wicked Witch, sometimes we know we have to look at that with truth and purity and say, is this really real? Or do I have to just melt it by water and it can dissipate and move away? And then there is the cyclone. The cyclone by itself is like our inner turmoil, but it looks like it's on the outside, right? So you know how sometimes we can create inner turmoil? It's sometimes the codependent behavior we have that creates turmoil against or with a few people in our life along the way. And sometimes it's necessary chaos. Sometimes necessary chaos is about the fact that we just need chaos to be able to move forward. We need to have new thoughts and changes and adventures, and that we need to be able to leave the past behind. But sometimes it's easy to stay where we are because, that whole saying about the comfort zone, it's easier to stay there. And I think Reverend Ogan talked about that last week. It's easier to stay in a place of comfort which isn't great, rather than move to the vulnerable. So the cyclone comes along to move our house and twist things around and create the storm we need to have to move through into a different life path, and sometimes to leave the past behind. And sometimes that's what we need to do, is leave the past behind. After the cyclone and everything sort of changes, and Dorothy gets to the land of Oz, of course, which is where the new life path begins. On this new life path, there's a couple of folks that she runs into. She runs into an entire group of people called the Munchkins. The Munchkins are an entire community. They live in the land of Oz. They think the wizard is wonderful. They have never seen the Wizard of Oz. They're just quite sure that he's just absolutely magnificent and can do everything. But this is in almost a childlike playfulness, in the sense of curiosity, but a bit of fear. The Munchkins embrace Dorothy, even though she's a perfect stranger dropped into their land. She looks totally different than them, but in a kindness way, they are so good to her, and all they want her to do is follow the life path, follow the yellow brick road, get to where she needs to be. And that is the spiritual ideal, of course. A little farther in the story, and I put these on the same slide only to sort of save slides, but the flying monkeys come from the Wicked Witch of the West. And the flying monkeys do the Wicked Witch's bidding. They are a little bit scary. I don't know if you see that picture there, but to me they're kind of creepy looking. So it's like, oh, did you ever like watch the movie and like not like the flying monkeys? It's like they're kind of scary to see. But they talk about and represent the codependent behavior we sometimes have, even when it is detrimental, because the monkeys will actually do anything the witch says. They're not going to ask any questions. They're not going to say, is this right or wrong? They're just going to go and do her bidding. So almost like the rote behavior that we walk through if we don't start to analyze what we should be changing or doing or paying attention to. So we enable sometimes bad habits of ourselves or others. We stay in behaviors that aren't necessarily purposeful. And we use rote behavior as if we just don't think about maybe what we say or what we do, because that's what we've always done. And yet at any time we can change that. It just means we have to also change our behavior. And the monkeys represent that rote behavior, so that they don't ask any questions. They just do the bidding that the Wicked Witch tells them to do. And some of that bidding can be on the sense of not nice, difficult, and striving, of course, to do worse things rather than better things in the long run. Then we come to the great characters. So Dorothy meets the characters, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. Each of them was requiring something. So the Scarecrow speaking away. I think one of the great sayings is she says, how can you talk if you don't have a brain? Because he wants a brain, right? And he goes, I think I know a lot of people that talk that don't have a brain, which I think is a pretty funny quote. The Scarecrow is full of straw and is afraid of fire, but wants a brain. She unhooks him down and they walk together for a little while. Toto has already barked at him to let Dorothy know it's an actual character there. Then they come across the Tin Man. The Tin Man is seized up and needs some oil, which wouldn't that say needs some love, right? And Dorothy oils him, and eventually his arms move and his legs move and his neck moves and he feels better, and he's looking for a heart. So he's looking for the love he thinks he doesn't have, and yet he has it all inside him all the time. And when he needs love, somebody else comes along to love him with this oil to make him better again. And then, of course, there's the Cowardly Lion. The Cowardly Lion comes along and says, he's afraid of everything. He has no courage. So he's looking to find courage. And of course, they're all on this journey now on the yellow brick road to find these things they need to have. Dorothy just wants to go home. That's all she wants. But they're looking for a heart and a brain and courage. And aren't we always told it's all inside us now? So do those things not equate? Spirit, mind, and body. They're always there, but we must believe in them to be useful. If we don't believe they're there, they're not. But they always are there. So we can always tap into that inner guidance, that inner knowing that inner heart, brain, and courage to move forward on our path. In the movie, this didn't happen in the book, by the way, in the movie, they kind of wrap up with Dorothy going home, and a home is on the Uncle Henry and Auntie Em's farm. And there is 3 hired hands. And aren't they actually a reflection of the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion? Hunk, Zeke, and Hickory are their names. I had to look those up, actually. I couldn't remember the names of what they were, which also suggests that these hired hands, you know, they work on the farm, right? To make the farm go, to make the farm be viable, we have to have these hired hands. And they're always there. They're always there in the background. And that's always where our heart and our brain and our courage is. It may not be noticeable until we have to bring it to the forefront, but it is always there in the background. I thought that was a great way to tie together the movie. Then there's Glinda the Good Witch. She comes along to say to Dorothy, you have it all inside you. You never have to worry. She's the mother archetype. She's also a symbol of female autonomy. She doesn't look to anyone else to help her. There's a great Facebook meme that says, dress the way you want to come to work. So I always put the Glinda one up because I think that's the perfect way. And I'd like to go dress like that every day. If I could wear a sparkly dress and a crown like that, that would be perfect. She also is a spirit of freedom. She comes and goes as she chooses. She often comes along when things are necessary. She gives advice, but she doesn't necessarily do anything. She lets you know that the love and light is always within us. So she's a spirit guide, or she's a guardian angel. She shows up occasionally. She's always in a loving way. She wants to embrace that fact of being motherly or a spirit guide. She says, you are capable of more than you know. And isn't that the truth for all of us? When faced with the most difficult things, for most of us, we think, oh, I can't possibly face these things, but we can. Have you ever looked back in your life and said, how did I ever do that? We are capable of more than we ever know. And when Dorothy talks about home, she says, home is a place we all must find, child. It's not just a place where you eat or sleep. Home is knowing your mind, knowing your heart, and knowing your courage. So using all the things that she's found and the folks along the way that looking for a need, it's all inside them. If we know ourselves, we are always home anywhere. And here's the ruby red slippers. By the way, there's a fantastic documentary about the ruby red slippers. What happened with them when they got made for the movie, how many pairs got made, who got them, and the last 3 pairs that were out there, one of them went to a museum somewhere in New York and got stolen from the museum, and they eventually found them in somebody's house. Anyway, great documentary about the ruby red slippers. But they represent the triumph of good over error. And I don't use the word evil. It's not a word I use in my vocabulary. So I use error based on the fact that any error can be shifted or changed. So we can always make good on something. And the ruby red slippers are a representation. They don't do it. They just represent that. So if we wear the slippers, we may feel empowered. And we can always go home. Home, again, as Glinda said, is the place of love and safety. But it can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be actually where we started or where parents are or family is. It can be anywhere. And it's a physical item that represents our inner abilities. We know that we can do it. It's all inside you, but you don't always know until you have the slippers on. Glinda says to Dorothy, you had the power all along, my dear. And a couple of other representations we see. Yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road. It leads to the wizard. Well, actually, the yellow brick road is just our life path. The life path is going to go in whatever direction it's going to go. It's going to take twists and turns and go into dark places like the forest they start in. So everybody's a little bit nervous and afraid. But the Buddhists talk about the golden path of spiritual enlightenment, to continue and keeping on the road, moving forward, not letting what gets in our way stop us at any point. We can move through, again, with water, using that idea of truth and purity to move on through that and make sure we continue to follow the golden path, or the path that is to the enlightenment we wish to seek. And then there's the Emerald City. The Emerald City is always far off somewhere in the future. In the book, they actually talk about putting green glasses on so that everything looks like it's magically green. And it's interesting that green would also symbolize money as a metaphysical symbol, or at least the material world. Emerald City actually represents the things we think we require materially. We have to get stuff, we have to move to stuff, we have to go forward, we have to get to things, and we never have to get to things. The findings of the something always have us living in the future, not living in the moment. So to go towards the Emerald City while on a good path means that we're always looking to the future of something shiny or sparkly that's out there. And maybe the best idea is to continue on the path and enjoy the actual movement along the path instead, not always looking to just the Emerald City or just the required material items that we think we need to move through our life experience. And then we come to the wizard. It struck me to change these words because I found them and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to leave these exactly what I see and some of the things I read, that the wizard is the God humanized figure of organized religion. I really feel this way, and I hope I don't want to offend anybody, but there's a lot of people that still talk about, some mother, father, God, somebody out there, somebody's going to fix everything. And it's a bit of a fear-based story. And it's a story that can't be changed or proven. Right? So every time we look into something, we can take ideas from it. Can't prove it didn't live there. We know that in biblical sense, many stories were written, but they've also been interpreted. They've been changed in language. They've been decided on by particular religions of what's going to be kept in and what's going to be left out. And it's basically a facade to keep the message in spiritual darkness. The facade allows things to be told you have to do to get to a certain place. In this case, we'll call it heaven or hell, which happens in several religions. The idea to keep that in place, that something else knows more, is what the wizard is all about. And in the long run, there is no wizard. And we know at the end of the movie, if you've seen the movie, there's a man that comes out. Everything goes quite terribly and now falls apart and explodes. And it's just a person playing this game with them to be bigger than. And so really, spirit is inside us. The guidance is already inside us. We already know from the figures that are there with the scarecrow and the tin man and the lion, all they looked for was already inside them. Once they had some kind of challenge, it came up for them. They didn't have to go looking for it from a wizard whatsoever. At some point, the wizard says to Dorothy, everything you were looking for was right inside you. I did like Cheryl, I clicked on a little too fast. It was all inside you and it was with you all the time. So the wizard actually even has the realization is everything we're looking for was right there inside you all along. And that is how the movie ends, but it goes along to go back in the movie, back to where Dorothy was. She gets back home by clicking her shoes 3 times, click, click, click. And it really didn't matter that she had the shoes because she could go home at any time, as Glinda told her. She didn't need the shoes at all. She just needed to return home up here in her mind and know she was in the right place. There's no place like home, says Dorothy Gale. And from radical acceptance, we know that we're all the personification of Dorothy. Dorothy represents the journey we're already on, whether we know it or not. And as the Ruby Red Slippers show, Dorothy was able to click her heels and manifest whatever she wished for. The clicking of the heels was just a motion. It was already there anyways. We too already have this power of manifestation, and fears can be reduced and eliminated by continuing on the path and throwing truth and courage onto our errors. It doesn't mean we won't make mistakes, but errors can be corrected along the way. And when we express the qualities of the scarecrow, the tin man, and the lion, we follow the inner intuition and listening. Think of that intuition as our gut feeling. We often can feel things already. We face them and continue the journey, and then we can awaken in our inner truth. By expressing our inner qualities of love and altruism, compassion and kindness towards others, our soul will be guided by the light of source to the rightful place. In the big scheme of things, there is no grand wizard. It's all inside us, always, right? And technically, we're always home. Let's go into some meditation. Let's take a deep breath and go within. As Reverend Ogun reminded us for radical acceptance, it begins with a sacred pause. Let's take a moment to just examine our bodies slowly and just recognize any areas of tightness or trauma and release them. We can start through our toes, move through our knees and upper legs and through our pelvic area, going through the chakras as we move upwards towards the body. From the stomach through to the heart chakra, to our shoulders and our neck and down our arms to our fingertips. And complete this body scan with going through our face, our nose, our lips, our eyes. Go through our mind and end with that crown chakra. If you'd like to for meditation, just close your eyes or soften them with whatever you feel comfortable. The song says, follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Remember, the yellow brick road is just our life journey. And I say just because we're all on it anyway, but it's actually more than that. It's our golden path. We have everything inside of us to meet any wicked witch along the way, or any flying monkey fears that come to disrupt our life. Sometimes the disruption is welcome. And by engaging our body, which is our lion's courage, and our mind, our scarecrow's brain, and our spirit, our tin man's heart, we can rely on our friend Toto, our way shower, our co-creator, to travel the path with ease and grace. All we meet along the way are there to help us serve to us for learning new lessons. That allows us to have new experiences and grow outside our comfort zone. We know there is no wizard out there, but the knowledge of understanding radical acceptance says there is no place like home. And we know home is the place where we feel most loved, most safe, and most secure. Treat every day as a gift. It's the present. Live in it and embrace it rather than seeing somewhere over the rainbow as the destination required. The Emerald City in the distance is just the material stuff along the way. And while some things may seem necessary, they are never more important than who we meet along the way. We remain a bit like a munchkin. Remain in childlike awe at how wonder-filled our world is, how much we can accomplish, and all the good you can bring to it. Hold your Glinda friends close, as they are the guiding stars along the way that can remind you that while you may or may not have the ruby red slippers, you have the power anytime, all the time. It's all inside you. May every storm end with a beautiful rainbow, and every concern we have be solved with 3 clicks of your magic red slippers. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. And we are always home. Namaste, and so it is.